The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. It was the kind of smell that clung to your clothes and followed you home. A reminder that something fragile had happened here. Something life-changing. Ethan Cole sat alone beneath a flickering fluorescent light. Elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The television mounted in the corner played a daytime talk show to an audience of no one. A vending machine hummed. Somewhere down the hall a child cried. He didn't move. 3 days ago his doctor had said the word biopsy. Yesterday the word urgent. This morning we'll have the results by noon. It was 11:47 a.m. Ethan had always imagined moments like this would feel dramatic, like the movies, like violins playing softly in the background, like time slowing down in some poetic way. But it didn't. It felt ordinary, painfully, brutally ordinary. He was 41 years old, a mechanic from Ohio, a widower for 6 years, a father to no one. That last part had never stopped hurting. He and his wife, Lila, had tried for children for nearly a decade. Fertility clinics, hormone shots, 2 miscarriages, 1 nursery painted pale yellow that never held a crib. When cancer took her at 34, the silence in their house became permanent. After she died, Ethan sold the house, kept the toolbox, donated the crib they'd bought too early. He told himself he'd made peace with it. But sitting in that hospital chair, waiting to find out whether something was growing inside him that shouldn't be, he realized the truth. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of dying unnoticed. At 11:52 a.m., the automatic doors to the waiting room slid open. 3 little girls walked in like a gust of chaotic spring air. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Identical braids, identical denim jackets, identical sparkly pink sneakers that lit up when they stepped. Triplets. Behind them hurried a woman in scrubs, her dark curls pulled into a messy bun. She looked exhausted and apologetic at the same time. "Girls, please," she whispered urgently. Inside voices. "This is a hospital." The smallest one glanced around the room, eyes wide. There were only 3 other people waiting, an elderly couple holding hands, a teenage boy scrolling on his phone, and Ethan. The middle girl tugged at her sister's sleeve and pointed at him. He didn't realize they were staring until the tallest one walked straight over and stopped, directly in front of him. He blinked. She tilted her head. "Are you alone?" The question landed heavier than she meant it to. "Yes," he said quietly. Her bottom lip trembled just slightly, like she was gathering courage. Then she leaned in closer. "Can you pretend you're our father?" Ethan's breath caught. "What?" "Just for a minute," the second one whispered, stepping beside her sister. "Please." Behind them, the woman in scrubs was speaking with a receptionist, distracted. Her shoulders were tense in a way Ethan recognized immediately. Fear, disguised as responsibility. The third girl looked back toward her mother, then back at Ethan. "Our daddy didn't come," she said softly. "And Mommy's scared." Something inside Ethan shifted. He looked at the woman again. She was nodding while the receptionist explained something, but her eyes looked shiny, like she hadn't slept, like she was holding it together by a thread. "Why me?" Ethan asked gently. The tallest girl shrugged. "You look kind." It was such a simple answer, such an undeserved one. Ethan swallowed. What would pretending involve? The 3 girls exchanged serious glances, like executives negotiating a contract. "Just sit with us," one said. "And hold Mommy's hand," another added. "And when they call her name," the smallest finished, "walk with her. So she's not alone." The weight of it pressed against his chest. He didn't know these people. He didn't know what test results she was waiting for. He didn't even know her name. But he knew what alone felt like in rooms like this, and he wouldn't wish it on anyone. Before he could overthink it, Ethan nodded. "Okay?" The relief on their faces was immediate and breathtaking. They scrambled onto the chairs beside him, one on each side, one practically climbing into his lap without asking permission. He stiffened for half a second. He hadn't held, a child in years, but then instinct took over. Small hands slipped into his, warm, trusting. A few minutes later, the nurse called, "Marisol Vega." The woman in scrubs froze. The girls all looked at Ethan at once. This was it. He stood. Marisol turned, confusion flickering across her face. as she saw him walking toward her with her daughters attached like ducklings. She started. One of the girls spoke first. "Mommy, this is our pretend daddy." The room went still. Marisol's eyes widened, embarrassment flooding her expression. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." Ethan shook his head gently. "It's okay." The smallest girl grabbed her mother's hand and placed it in Ethan's. "See?" she whispered. "Now you're not alone." Marisol's fingers trembled against his. For a split second, Ethan considered stepping back, explaining, creating distance. Instead, he tightened his grip. "I've got you," he said quietly. The nurse gave them a soft smile and led them down the hallway. The girls weren't allowed inside the consultation room, so a volunteer ushered them toward the pediatric play area. Ethan hesitated. "You don't have to," Marisol whispered. "Yes," he said gently, "I do." Inside the small, sterile office, the doctor closed the door. Marisol sat down, shoulders squared like she was bracing for impact. Ethan stayed standing beside her. The doctor folded her hands. "Your scans came back." Time shifted. Ethan felt Marisol's hand tighten. "It's not cancer." The air left the room all at once. Marisol let out a sound that was half sob, half laughter. Her head dropped forward, shoulders shaking. "There is a mass," the doctor continued, "but it's benign. We'll schedule surgery, but your prognosis is excellent." "Excellent." Ethan felt something inside his own chest crack open. Marisol turned toward him without thinking and pressed, her forehead against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, not because he was pretending, but because in that moment she needed someone to hold the weight of relief with her. When they stepped back into the hallway, the triplets were waiting at the corner, bouncing with nervous energy. "Well?" the tallest demanded. Marisol dropped to her knees and opened her arms. The girls collided with her. "It's okay," she whispered into their hair. "Mommy's going to be okay." All three burst into tears at once. Ethan stood a few feet away, watching something sacred unfold. The smallest one looked up at him through teary lashes. "You helped," she said. He shook his head. "You did. They insisted he come with them to the cafeteria, insisted he sit, insisted he eat the celebratory chocolate pudding cups they'd picked out." Marisol kept looking at him like she couldn't quite believe he was real. "I'm sorry," she said once the girls were distracted with spoons and giggles. "They've been terrified. Their father left 2 years ago. When I told him about the tests..." He stopped answering his phone. Ethan nodded slowly. "I guess they just didn't want to watch me walk in there alone." He looked down at his hands. "I know that feeling." She studied him. "You're waiting for results too." It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Biopsy," he said simply. Her eyes softened. "Do you have someone coming?" He shook his head. Marisol didn't hesitate. "Then we're staying." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but one of the girls interrupted. "Of course we're staying," she said firmly. "That's what families do." Families. The word lodged in his throat. An hour later, a nurse called his name. Ethan's legs felt heavier this time. Marisol stood immediately. The girls each grabbed one of his fingers. The hallway felt less cold. Inside the consultation room, Ethan sat down. Marisol stood beside him, just like he had for her. The doctor spoke gently. "The mass we found is malignant." The word echoed. "Cancer." Ethan's ears rang. "But," the doctor continued quickly, "we caught it very early. Stage 1. With surgery and treatment, your prognosis is extremely good." Extremely good. Not excellent, but good. Ethan exhaled slowly. He wasn't dying. Not today. Marisol squeezed his shoulder. "You hear that?" she whispered. "You're staying." He let out a shaky laugh he hadn't realized he was holding in. When they returned to the waiting area, the girls jumped up. "Well?" they asked in unison. Ethan knelt down in front of them. "I'm going to be okay," he said. The relief on their faces mirrored what he'd seen earlier. The smallest one wrapped her arms around his neck. "See," she said. "You needed us." Maybe he had. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. They didn't disappear from each other's lives. Marisol insisted on driving him to his first surgical appointment. Ethan fixed the brakes on her aging Honda in return. The girls drew him pictures, crayon, masterpieces of stick figure, families with 4 kids instead of 3. "Who's the extra one?" he asked once. "That's you," they said. He laughed. but he kept the drawing. Treatment was hard. There were days Ethan felt hollowed out. Days the fear came back louder than before. But he was never alone in a waiting room again. The girls made signs. Marisol brought homemade soup. They sat with him through chemo sessions, braiding friendship bracelets around his wrist. One afternoon, months later, Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror and ran a hand over his regrowing hair. He looked different, stronger somehow. His phone buzzed with a picture message. 3 identical grins, missing front teeth. Caption, "Pretend, Daddy, hurry up. It's pizza night." He smiled. Pretend. The word didn't fit anymore. That evening, as they sat around Marisol's small kitchen table, pizza boxes open, laughter bouncing off the walls, the tallest girl cleared her throat dramatically. "We had a meeting," she announced. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Yes," the second confirmed. "A serious one." Marisol hid a smile behind her glass. The smallest one slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Ethan opened it. Inside was a crayon contract. It read, "Dear Ethan, you don't have to pretend anymore. Love your girls." Below it were 3 messy signatures. Ethan stared at the paper until his vision blurred. "I don't want to replace anyone," he said quietly. Marisol reached across the table and covered his hand. "You're not replacing anyone," she said. "You're choosing us. And we're choosing you." The girls waited, breath held. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a man standing outside of life looking in. He felt claimed. He looked at 3 hopeful faces and one brave woman who had once walked into a hospital terrified. "I'm not very good at braiding hair," he warned. The girls gasped. "We'll teach you," they said immediately. He laughed through tears. "Okay," he whispered. "No more pretending." Outside, the world moved the same as it always had. Cars passed. People hurried. Hospitals filled and emptied. But inside that small kitchen, something extraordinary had taken root. Not because of grand gestures, not because of fate, but because 3 little girls had seen a lonely man in a waiting room and decided he looked kind. And because he chose to say yes. Sometimes family isn't born. Sometimes it's whispered. "Pretend you're our father." And sometimes, if you're brave enough to take a stranger's trembling hand, pretending becomes the most real thing in the world.